either working or they have to stop for a drink at some bar, or when the girl feels that she has to, if she has a fussy husband and she feels she has to have the dinner ready at exactly a certain moment, she ruins the cooking, you know, by speeding up things that shouldn't be cooked so long because she's afraid of displeasing her husband. And he wants to come in and he expects dinner on time because that's a ritual. And if she doesn't do it on time, for some reason or other, she's an unfaithful wife. He'd rather have a faithful wife than a bad cook. So, harmony, what men hate is forlornness, loneliness, being a trifle, and yet... So, you see, we spend an awful lot of energy trying to make our lives fit images of what life is or should be, which they can never possibly fit. So Zen practice is in getting rid of these images. But it's so explosive socially to do that. And it so worries people. They get vertigo, they get dizzy, they don't know which end is up. And this happens, you know, if you've ever been in one of those blab sessions, where they call them tea groups, I think, or something like that, where people gather together without any clear idea of what this gathering's about. They know it's somehow self-exploration, but just how do you begin on that? And so somebody starts to push his idea, and then somebody else says, well, why are you trying to push your idea on us? And then they all get into an argument about the argument. And the most amazing confusions come about, but sometimes they all see what idiots they're being, and then they learn to live together in a really open and spontaneous way. So, the function of a Zen teacher is to put his students in all kinds of situations where in the normal course of social relations they would get stuck. By asking nonsensical questions, by making absurd remarks, by all ways of unhinging things, and above all, keeping them stirred up with impossible demands. To hear the sound of one hand, to, without moving, stop a ship sailing out on the water, or to stop the sound of a train whistle in the distance. Magic. To touch the ceiling without getting up from one's chair. To take the 4 divisions of Tokyo out of your sleeve. To take Mount Fuji out of a pillbox. All these impossible questions are asked. And in the ordinary way of interpreting these questions, we think, well, now, gee, how could we do that? See, that's a very difficult question that's been asked. And you have to think, what would I do to do that? Because we are caught up in a certain way of discourse, which, let me repeat, the ordinary methods of the language game that we play, and the social games, the production games, and the survival games that we play are good games. But we take them so seriously that we think that that is the only important thing. And this is to unstick us from that notion and realize that it would be just as good a game to drop dead now as to go on living. Is a lightning flash bad because it lives for a second as compared with the sun that goes on for billions of years? You can't make that sort of comparison, because the world of lightning goes also with the world where there's a sun, and vice versa. So, long-lived creatures and short-lived creatures go together. That's the meaning of that saying. Flowering branches grow naturally, some short, some long. So, this then is a scene in a Zen community where spontaneous behavior is encouraged within certain limits. And as the student becomes more and more used to it, those limits are expanded until eventually he can be trusted to go out on the street and behave like a true Zen character and get by perfectly well. So, You know what occasionally happens on the street when two people are walking down the sidewalk straight at each other, and they both decide to move to the right together, and then to the left together, and they somehow get stuck, and they can't pass each other. Zen teachers will pull just exactly that sort of stunt when going down the path and meet one of their students, to see if they can get him in a tangle, and can he escape from it. There was a very interesting dinner party once where the Zen master was present, and there was a geisha girl who served so beautifully and had such style that he suspected she must have some Zen training. And after a while, when she paused to fill his sake cup, he bowed to her and said, "I'd like to give you a present." And she said, "I would be most honored." And he took the iron chopsticks that are used for the hibachi, the charcoal brazier, moving the charcoal around. He picked up a piece of red-hot charcoal and gave it to her. Well, she had very long sleeves on her kimono. She whirled the sleeves around her hands and took the hot charcoal, withdrew to the kitchen, dumped it, and changed her kimono because it was burnt through. Then she came back into the room, and after a suitable interval, she stopped before the Zen master and bowed to him and said, "I would like to give you, sir, a present." And he said, "I would be very much honored." Of course, he was wearing a kimono or something like this. And so she picked up a piece of coal and said, and offered it to him. He immediately produced a cigarette and said, "Thank you, that's just what I needed." Now, you know, in the same way that we have this in our culture, certain people who are comedians, who know how to make jokes and gags in a completely unprepared situation, face them with anything, and they somehow come through. So that is exactly the same thing in a special domain as Zen. Only the master of Zen does this in every life situation. But the important thing is to be able to do this. This is the secret. You must remember, you can't make a mistake. Now, that's a very difficult thing to do. Because from childhood up, we have had to conform to a certain social game. And if you're going to conform to this game, you can make mistakes or not make mistakes. So this thing has gone into us all the time. You must do the right thing. There's certain conduct appropriate here, there's certain conduct appropriate there. And that sticks in us and gives us a double self all our lives long because we never grow up. You do realize that the whole of life plays a game, which is a childhood game. There can't be, there are three kinds of people: top people, middle people, and bottom people. And there can't be any middle people unless there are bottom people and top people. There can't be any top people unless there are middle and bottom people. And so it goes. And everybody's trying to be in a top set. Well, if they're going to be there, there's got to be someone in a bottom set. And the people who do the right thing and the people who do the wrong thing. Here in Sausalito, we have this very, very plainly. There are the right people, the nice people who live up on the hill. Then there are the nasty people who live down here on the waterfront, and they grow beards, and they wear blue jeans, and they smoke marijuana. And whereas the other people on the top of the hill drive Cadillacs and have wall-to-wall carpeting and nicely mowed lawns, and their particular kind of poison is alcohol. Now, the people who live on the top of the hill know that they're nice people. But they wouldn't know they were nice people unless they had some nasty people to compare themselves with. Every in-group requires an out-group, whereas the nasty people think they are the real far-out people, whereas those people, those hillbillies, are squares. And they wouldn't be able to feel far out unless there were squares. See? These things simply go together. But when that is not seen, we play the games of getting on top of things all the time. And so we're in a constant state of competition as to, if it's not I'm stronger than you, it's I'm wiser than you, I'm more loving than you, I'm more tolerant than you, I'm more sophisticated than you. It doesn't matter what it is, but this constant competition is going on. In terms of that competition, we can, of course, lose place and in that sense make mistakes. But what a Zen student is a person who is not involved in the status game. That's the real meaning of a monk. He is not keeping up with the Joneses, and to be a master, he must get to the point where he's not trying to be a master. No, not that. That vanishes. From that point of view, the whole idea of your being better than anybody else simply doesn't make any sense at all. It is totally meaningless. Because you see everybody manifesting the marvel of the universe in the same way as the stars do, and the water, and the winds, and the animals. And you see them all as being in their right places and not being able really to make mistakes, although they may think they're making mistakes or not making mistakes and playing all these competitive games, but that's their game. Now, I only say if that game begins to bore you and it begins to trouble you and give you ulcers and all kinds of things, then you raise the problem of getting out of it. And therefore you start to become interested in things like Zen. That is simply a symptom of your growing in a certain direction, where you are tired of playing a certain kind of game. You are as naturally flowing in another direction as if a tree were putting out a new branch. So because you say, oh, well, we people are interested in higher things, and we are very much superior. We were talking a lot this morning about morons and simple-minded people who seem to be like the sages. But you see, that depends still on the differentiation of rank between the superior and the inferior people. But when you begin to see through that and grow out of that, you don't think anymore of this superior and inferior classification. You don't think. We are spiritual people who attend to higher things as distinct from these morons who are only interested in beer and television. This is simply our particular form of life. Like there are crabs, and there are spiders, and there are sharks, and there are sparrows, and so on. So, the trouble with the human being is, like the trouble with certain animals, like the dinosaur, who evolved to the point where he was so big that he had to have two brains, a higher self in the head and a lower self in the rump. And the difficulty was to get these two brains coordinated. But we have exactly the same trouble. And we are suffering from a kind of jitters that comes from being two-brained. Now, you see, I'm not saying that that jitters is bad. It's a potential step in evolution and an opportunity of growth. But remember, in the process of growth, the oak is not better than the acorn. Because what does it do? It produces acorns. Or you could say, just like I sometimes love to say, that a chicken is one egg's way of becoming others. So an oak is an acorn's way of becoming other acorns. Where is the point of superiority? The first verse of that poem I just quoted, the flowering branches grow naturally, some short, some long. The first verse is, in the landscape of spring, there is nothing superior and nothing inferior. The flowering branches are naturally, some short, some long. So that's the point of view of being an outcast, in the sense of being outside the taking seriously of being involved in the social game and therefore being threatened by making mistakes, of doing the wrong thing, That is to say, of carrying into adult life one's childhood condition, where somebody is constantly yammering at you to play the game. So therefore, the preachers and the teachers take the same attitude towards their adult congregations that parents take to children, and lecture them and tell them what they should do. And judges in courts feel also entitled to give people lectures because they say those criminal types haven't grown up, but neither have the judges. It takes two to make a quarrel. So one can begin to think in a new way, in the polarity thinking, instead of being stuck with the competitive thinking of the good guys and the bad guys, the cops and the robbers, the capitalists and the communists, all these things, which are simply childishness. Now, of course, you recognize that the moment I say that, it's like talking in English in order to show that the English language has limitations. And I am talking in a language that seems competitive to show that the competitive game has limitations. As if I were saying to all you cats here, look, I have something to tell you that is, and if you get this, you'll be in a better position than you were before you heard it. But I cannot speak to this group or the society or this language-speaking culture without using the language, the gestures, the customs, etc. that you have. The Zen masters try to get around this by doing things suddenly that people just don't get. Well, what is this? But therefore, that is the reason why. This is the real reason why Zen cannot be explained. You have to make, as it were, a jump from the valuation game of better people and worse people, in groups and out groups. And you can only make it by seeing that they all are mutually interdependent. So if we take this situation, let's say I would be talking to you and saying, look, I have some very special thing that you've got to take notice of. Therefore, I am the in-group, and I'm the teacher, and you are the out-group. I know perfectly well that I cannot be the teacher unless you come. And so that my status and my position is totally dependent on you. It isn't something, you see, therefore I have first, and then you get. These things arise mutually. So if you wouldn't come, I wouldn't talk. I wouldn't know what to say. Because I borrowed your language. So that is the insight that things go together. Then, when you see that and aren't in competition, then you don't make a mistake, because you don't dither. When I first learned the piano and played these wretched scales, the teacher beside me had a pencil in her hand, and she hit my fingers every time I made a wrong note. Consequence was I never learned to read music, because I hesitated too long to play the note on time. Because I was always, is this pencil going to land? See? And that gets built into your psyche. And so people are always, although they're adults and nobody is clubbing them around and screaming at them any longer, they hear the echoes of that screaming mama or that bombinating papa in the back of their heads all their life long. And so they adopt the same attitudes to their own children, and the fast continues. Because there is no, I don't say that you shouldn't lay down the law to children if you want them to play the social game. But if you lay down the law to your children, you must make provision later in life for them to be liberated, to go through a process of curing them from the bad effects of education. But you can't do that unless you too grow up, you see, as we grow up. Says I, including myself.
Yeah, great.
It's a publication, not a confession. So that is the thing. Now, therefore, in the Zen scene, you would think think that the master, as we know him and as we read about him, is an extremely authoritarian figure. That's the way he deliberately comes on at the beginning. He puts up a terrific show of being an awful dragon. And this screens out all sorts of people who don't have somehow the nerve to get into the work. But once you are in, a very strange change takes place. The master becomes the brother. He becomes the affectionate helper of all those students, and they love him as they would a brother, rather than respect him as they would a father. And therefore, the students and masters, they make jokes about each other. They, a very curious kind of social relationship, which has all the outward trappings of the authoritarian, but everybody knows on the inside that that's a joke. Liberated people have to be very cool. Otherwise, in a society which doesn't believe in equality and cannot possibly practice it, they would be considered extremely subversive. And therefore, great Zen masters wear purple and gold and carry scepters and sit in thrones. And all this is carried on to cool it. And the outside world knows that they're all right. They have discipline, they have order, they're perfectly fine. This seminar is going to be a fundamental course on cosmic gamesmanship. We shall discuss first of all, the yang and the yin, because what we are studying is the way whatever may be called the universal energy plays. And so the fundamental thing is yang and yin, the positive and negative principles, to use the Chinese words. Next, we shall discuss relativity. Next, we shall discuss group theory, in and out. And finally, we shall discuss identity. Who are you? But in starting, the moment one talks about cosmic gamesmanship, it carries with it the assumption that the physical universe is a game. And that doesn't seem to be taking it sufficiently seriously. Of course, according to Hindu philosophy, the physical universe is an illusion. They use the word Maya. But Maya has many meanings. And among these meanings, only one is illusion. And the word illusion, of course, always carries a bad connotation to Western ears. We want something that's for real. But it doesn't necessarily carry such a bad connotation to Hindu ears, because the word Maya also means magic, creative power, art, and of all things, measurement, because it comes from the Sanskrit root matra, M-A-T-R, from which, of course, we get meter, matter, and the Latin mater, mother. In other words, the world is looked upon, or can be looked upon, as a perfectly good illusion, because all art, in a way, is a creation of illusion. On a stage, the actor plays, and Hindus think of the world by analogy with drama. The whole thing is a big act, and there is one actor behind the whole thing, which is you. Not you in the sense of your so-called empirical ego, not you as you imagine yourself and as you ordinarily sense yourself to be, but what is really and truly you at a much deeper level. But you see, when we use the word game or play in English, we usually tend to mean that it's something trivial. You see, we divide life very strictly into play and work. Other peoples don't do this. And that's one of the shatteringly awful features of our culture, this division of play and work. So that most people are working at tasks which they hate. so that they can make enough money to stop doing it and play. Now, this is perfectly ridiculous. Nobody needs to do that. Because what you get with work, done in this way, done heartlessly and without joy, is money. And what can you do with it? Supposing you do earn time to spare and money to spend, what is there to buy with it? The answer is the other fake and joyless products made by other people who hate their work. So there is a certain phoniness, a certain lack of essential quality in almost all the work that we perform, because the work is done not for the work, but for money. And play is considered something separate from work. Work is serious. Play is not serious. In fact, we have a strange incapacity to play at all, because we always, especially in the United States, play with an ulterior motive. That is to say, play is good for you. And we do everything because it's good for us, because we judge the physical world with, without our senses. We judge in theory. We believe that the proof of the pudding is not in the eating, but in the chemical analysis. It is often my fate to have to take lunch in college cafeterias. And what must be happening to the intellectual life of the nation as a result of professors, graduate students, and students eating this kind of stuff? This must be catastrophic. Because I go all over the United States to various colleges, and everywhere the fare is exactly the same. You get a so-called salad, which is a piece of that wretched icebox lettuce, with a dollop of cottage cheese and a wedge of canned pineapple on top of it. And then you get slices of beef that have been tormented for hours in an electronic purgatory, sloshed over, or rather coated is the exact word, with a gravy made of water, library paste, and bouillon cubes. Then there are peas, carrots, and corn, which have been sterilized, because that's important, by boiling for hours. And finally, there is a pie, which is a slab of beige goo, crusted in reconstituted cardboard, and topped with sweetened shaving cream squirted from an aerosol bomb. And all this has been analyzed by dietitians and by the whole department of home economics, and is found to veritably contain the right amount of calories, proteins, carbohydrates, and vitamins. Now, actually, this is all a result of academic politics, because academic politics, you know, is mainly concerned with feuding between departments. And this is the way in which the home economics department has won out, by rotting the brains of historians, anthropologists, mathematicians, and physicists with this miserable fare. And this goes on all over. Things are judged, you see, because they're good for you. And if we inquire carefully as to what this good for us is, you mustn't look into that. It's taboo. The whole culture would fall apart if we found out what it was, because what is the good that is good for you is always and necessarily something in the future. It never happens, and it's never going to happen. All that these vitamins and carbohydrates and things can do for you is keep you in a state of reasonable survival, and in which you never catch up with anything. Because, you see, time is strictly an illusion. There is no such thing as time, any more than there is such a concrete thing as the equator. The measurement of time is a measure of motion, just like lines of latitude and longitude are a measure of the geographic surface of the Earth. And nobody will ever tie up a rolled roast with the equator. There is, however, such a thing as timing, which is quite different from time. Timing is skillful rhythm. But you cannot ever attain proper timing if you hurry, if you're in a hurry to get to the future, because the future is never going to arrive. So if you hurry to get to the future, you always get a punishment for it. For example, instant coffee, TV dinners, the sort of food they serve on airplanes, or beef that is cooked in electronic ovens where you push the switch and the whole roast is done. It isn't, it's heated through, it's not roasted. And all these things are awful because they are the result of the illusion of time, that there is something that is good for us and that we're going to get to. And so this is the result of an educational system which is completely geared to literary and mathematical pursuits, which trains everybody to be clerks, insurance salesmen, and bureaucrats. And only with great reluctance does education offer any kind of instruction in material competence, and then only for people who are considered too stupid to be intellectuals, to go on to college. So the basic arts of life in our culture, farming, cooking, dressing, furnishing, lovemaking, are utterly neglected. There is no sophisticated training widely available in any of these things for the average person. And so that's the reason why there is nothing on which to spend the time that we save and the money we earn, except trash. So fake cars, pasteboard houses, bread made of squishy styrofoam, vitamin enriched, and all that sort of thing, see, because of the illusion. We've fallen for the illusion of time. So only what is absolutely necessary for a culture, that means a society of cultivated people, is the cultivation and devotion to the present, to the material world, rather than to the purely theoretical world. You see, Maya in Sanskrit does indicate in one sense the physical world, because in the positive sense that the physical world is actually a marvelous work of art. But Maya in another sense, in the sense in which it means measurement, refers to all the ways we have of numbering and naming and dividing up into categories the physical world. So time is Maya. Latitude and longitude is Maya. The future is Maya, in the less exciting sense of illusion. So, you see, because of this state of mind, we don't think that play is important. We play in order to refresh ourselves to go back to work. And that's not playing. Playing is a real absorption in the delight of a dance, for example. You don't dance because it's good for you. You dance because you're happy. But you see, we have a very odd incapacity for happiness, because we are happier when we expect good things to happen rather than when they're happening. And so we say of a thing that we consider bad, it has no future. Well, nothing has a future. There isn't a future. There's always a present, and one has to get this as a kind of a basic approach. So then, one can also, therefore, use the word play or game in a sense that is not trivial. We don't think, for example, that when we hear a performance of a Bach cantata, or better, a purely non-symbolic thing, like a fugue, we don't think that that's trivial. We don't think it's trivial to play the organ in church. We don't think that the plays of Shakespeare are trivial. They're plays. A play, you see, in the sense that I'm using it, is a musical thing. It is a dance. It is an expression of delight, in the sense of Blake saying that energy is eternal delight. And, for example, the art of Islam, the arabesques, which aren't pictures of anything. They're just fantastically intricate, beautifully colorful designs. They are play. And according to this thesis, the universe is just like that. It is a very, very elaborate play system. And the fundamental elements of this play, the Chinese call the yang and the yin. Yang means the positive, and yin the negative. Yang refers to the south side of a mountain, which is in the sun, and yin to the north side, which is in the shade. Yang refers to the north bank of a river, which is in the sun, and yin to the south bank of a river, which is in the shade. Yang is symbolically or prototypically male. Yin is symbolically female. That's not to cast any reflections on women. So you might say there's the reason they're called male and female is that yang is aggressive and yin is yielding. Yang is convex, yin is concave. Now, the secret about the opposites, which is as important as realizing that there is no such thing as time, the secret about the opposites is this, that they appear to be as different can be. We say of opposites, like black and white, that they are the poles apart. But in using that phrase, poles, you imply a connection between them. As there is a connection of the north to the south pole of the earth, and as there is a connection between the north and south poles of the magnet. There are two ends of the same stick, two sides of the same coin, two opposite points on the same sphere. And that means that they go together. In Chinese, this is called arising mutually, as in the second chapter of Lao Tzu, where he says, when all the world knows beauty to be beautiful, there is already ugliness. When all the world knows goodness to be good, there is already evil. For to be and not to be arise mutually.
I guess takeout doesn't count. Tomorrow, table for two, Mediterranean, sushi, ooh, Italian. It's perfect. Open table.
What confuses people is that they don't see this. They think, for example, that the positive is something there which truly exists, whereas the negative has less reality. It doesn't exist. We think that, for example, the space in which this universe floats is a non-entity and has no importance. And we are thereby, because we see energy manifested in the positive aspect of things, and no energy manifested in the negative, we are afraid that energy and its delight is threatened by nothingness. That it's going to be swallowed up, and that in the end, darkness will win. We feel that about ourselves, and we feel it about the universe as a whole. Because energy is effort. And effort, after a while, you get tired and you can't keep it up. And so darkness must win. According to Chinese philosophy, that is a hallucination. Because energy cannot be manifested without inertia. There must be something to push against for there to be any manifestation of energy. You cannot dance without a floor to use your energy against. You cannot, when energy or any kind of motion is completely unobstructed, there's a sort of squish, a fizzle, and nothing happens. Because fundamentally, as we shall see next hour, motion is only realized when there is stillness, relative stillness. And so energy is only realized when there is inertia, and the positive is only realized when there is the negative to bring it out. These things work together, but when you don't realize it, you are anxious. You are afraid that the dark side is going to win. Now, the minute that happens, you become unable to play. You start getting serious, and the game degenerates into a fight. Because you feel it absolutely urgent and necessary under those circumstances that the positive must be made to win, accentuate the positive, you see? And that leads to all this beastly kind of religion, where people go around with forced smiles and hearty handshakes and accentuate the positive. And the moment a person does that, you know that it's a big fake, it's a put-on, and that there's something utterly unreal about it. That's why you may have often experienced the fact that certain kinds of virtuous people are offensively virtuous. And they're very difficult to get on with. They don't have any light touch. And of course, this is particularly prevalent in religions. Because not all religions, but many religions are states of terror about the negative side. I was talking with a very enlightened nun the other day, Catholic. And she was open to all sorts of new ideas. I said, you know, there's one thing wrong with your worship. And the way you sing your hymns and chant your chants and do all these rituals. You don't swing. I don't mean by that it isn't syncopated. I mean by that there is not an attitude of delight about it. It's always you feel the service is being conducted in the presence of the chief inspector of morals. The original stuffed shirt. The appalling grandfather, in whose presence you daren't show any kind of sprightliness. Because after all, you know, when we are children and we are very exuberant and we leap around and bounce and all over the place, we make the adults tired. Because the moment a child starts getting exuberant, we try to give him a guilty conscience. You have no business having so much fun. There are other people in the world who hurt. There are people who are starving. There are people who suffer. And for you to go around leaping around as if the whole thing is gorgeous is a kind of irreverence. So be guilty. Shut up. So as a result of that, where we think that an occasion is of particular solemnity, where you're in church or in court or standing in a row of Marines or something saluting the flag, everybody gets grim. And so there is no delight in religion of that kind. Well, there's none agreed with me that they really ought to do something about that. And I said, well, maybe I'll come to your convent and teach you how to sing. But you see, all of that is because of the fear that the nothing will win over the something. Now, it's true in games, there is a winner and there is a loser. But in a fight, it's different. In a fight, the object of victory is to get rid of the defeated party. Because he's bad, and he ought not to be there at all. But in a game, it's quite different. Because if there is to be a winner, there has to be a loser. So it's terribly important not to get rid of the opponent. You could have no chess unless you had the black side as well as the white. Impossible. So in a game, what we admire a person we call a good loser. That is to say, a good sport. Because he does not take the loss seriously. It's very instructive, for example, to play any game that you know well, whether it's chess or checkers or whatever, with yourself. And each time you move over to the opposite side, play it with your best skill. For example, you can play a very marvelous game. You take two cocktail olive toothpicks, you know, the kind they make into little plastic swords, and you do a fencing match with yourself. And actually try to stick one of your hands, and the other hand really tries to defend itself. You find this is extremely interesting. It's a meditation exercise. And then you realize, you see, what is the nature of a game. Because if you are a good chess player, you may congratulate yourself if your opponent wins, if you have given him a good contest. Because then the game as such was interesting. And you come to realize that you and your opponent in a game of chess together constitute a single organism, like your right hand and your left hand fencing with each other. Let not your left hand know what your right hand doeth. That means have a conspiracy to pretend that they don't belong to one organism and that they're different, like black and white, like space and solid. They must look as different as possible. But underneath, in order that there be a game, in order that there be, in other words, a relationship of these two, there has to be a secret agreement. They have to be tacitly one, but openly two, exoterically two, esoterically one. Because, you see, on the stage, when you get the hero and the villain, they are really friends behind the scenes because they belong to the same company of actors. But this mustn't be admitted on the stage, because that would give the show away. Now you see, it's true, we mustn't give the show away. That's why there are esoteric teachings. But on the other hand, there is another opposite extreme, which is not realizing that the show is a show. And that's as bad as giving the show away. So you have always, when you are in the theater, say you go to the movies, and you go to see some great horror movie, you know, awful thing. Well, why does one do it? You want a thrill. And the whole of the universe wants a thrill. That's what it's all about. Otherwise it would be boring. But when you go to the movie, you know in your heart of hearts that it's only a movie. And yet you contrive to some degree to forget this while you're there. And therefore get scared and feel real creeps. But that's great. Some people like to go and cry. They go and see some tragedy and just love to weep because it's a catharsis. It gets all the salt out of you or something, I know. And so you do this thing. And it is, we can say it's vicarious. Yeah. But that is the spirit of showmanship, of play. So one might say then that it is possible in this life to attain a sort of metaphysical courage in which you really know deep within that the most harrowing experiences that physical existence can offer are a show. Now this is the, what you might call ultimate nerve. And, for example, when the samurai in Japan studied Zen, that's what they wanted to get from it. They wanted to get ultimate nerve so that absolutely nothing would faze them. So there is a poem which says, "Under the sword lifted high, there is hell making you tremble. But go ahead, and there is the land of bliss." Don't hesitate, see, don't be blocked, don't be phased, nonplussed by the illusion. Now you would say, well, that's all very well, but I can't bring myself to that. I start to shake and I can't stop it. It's not to do with my will. And no amount of gritting my teeth, clenching my muscles, exercising my willpower can get rid of the shakes when I am really scared. That's true. But you must remember that the secret to all this is not to be afraid of fear. When you can really allow yourself to be afraid, and you don't resist the experience of fear, you are truly beginning to master fear. But when you refuse to be afraid, you are resisting fear. And that simply sets up a vicious circle of being afraid of fear and being afraid of being afraid of fear, and so on. And that's what we call worry. Worry is simply a chronic condition. And people who worry are going to worry no matter what happens. Because when one possible threat is exterminated, they will immediately discover another. Because worry is an infinitely skinned onion. And you can go on and on and on, because the moment you see, you reduce the size of the onion and you get your worry down to about this, suddenly your whole sense of distance and size changes. And because you're looking so intently at this little onion, it fills your whole field of vision and is once again a big onion. See? You start peeling that down. But as you get another little one about this size, then it enlarges itself in your judgment and your sense of value. And once more, it's colossal. Now, that's always going on. So if you are disposed to worry, there is always plenty to worry about. You make plenty of money and you have no troubles about that, then you start wondering if you're going to get a disease. And the doctor says, no, it's all right, nothing wrong with you. Then you wonder if you're going to get into an accident. And then you take precautions, and then you wonder if there's going to be a political revolution, etc. Whether your house is going to be robbed. There's always something. So it is really, this kind of worrying is a completely useless pursuit. And yet, we feel a little guilty if we don't do it. Because it's somehow put into us that the proper amount of worrying is showing a good sense of responsibility. You're concerned. And Paul Tillich used this word concern in a special way. The Quakers always use the word concerned. And all people, you might say, who are socially conscious are concerned. So when we say I'm concerned, it means I have a frown on my face. And I'm worried about you, about the nation, about the war, so on, concerned. And Tillich said, religion is ultimate concern. I am concerned about the universe. And he used this wonderful decontaminated word for God, which he got from Eckhart, the ground of being. See, God still has whiskers on it, but the ground of being doesn't, obviously. And so ultimate concern is to be concerned about the ground of being. Well, now, I don't think, I'm not sure about Tillich. I knew him, and he was a very wonderful man. But what I call concern, in the way I would want to interpret it, instead of this sort of frown, is something more like amazement. In other words, that existence is extremely peculiar. I can't explain this feeling because I don't know quite how to ask a question about existence so that I could be said to be wondering about it in some sort of clear thinking way. It's a very nice thing to consider to yourself that if you were going to have an interview with the Lord God, and you would have only 5 minutes, and you might ask one question, what would you ask? And you've got plenty of time to think this over in advance. And you realize, question after question, say, no, that's not really the thing I want to get at. It's not that. Like, do you exist? God would say, well, of course. Yes, here I am. Am I having a hallucination? No. Well, how can I be sure that this isn't a hallucination, you see? And then you reject all that sort of question. And when you finally come down to it, you don't know what to ask. There is a sort of question in your mind, not so much a question as a questioning. A feeling of, it's all unbelievable. It's amazing. I wonder at it. I marvel at it. It is a miracle that there is anything. But it's like a friend of mine who went to a Zen master, got an interview after a good deal of trouble, an interpreter. And he sat down and said, you know, now I'm here, I don't know what to ask. I just feel like laughing. And Zen master said, well, let's laugh. And they just broke up. So, but that feeling, you see, of the marvelousness of being is what I call, or would want to mean by Tillich's phrase, ultimate concern. It's also love is involved in it. See, that's the part of the problem of an abstractionist culture such as ours. As I indicated, we're not materialists, we're abstractionists. A materialist is a lover, and therefore is somebody related to the present. Because, you see, you can't love except in the present. When you have under your hands a piece of wood, and you say, my, hasn't that a gorgeous grain, you know, and fondle it. If it moves, fondle it. And, you run over this and think, isn't that gorgeous? Well, you're loving it. It may be that it's an apple in your hand, and you say, I love you so much I could eat you. And you eat it, and you relish it. That's loving in a special way. So concern and love, and there are many forms of love. There's a whole spectrum of different kinds of love, which runs from the red of libido to the violet of divine charity. But all of them are equally important because, as you know, you can't have the violet end without the red end.